Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of India International. First of all, many thanks for your comments on the previous episode on the politics of cartography. We have read these comments very carefully, and many of you have suggested that the episode was quite short and probably you need or you desire more explanation on some of the maps. So yes, we have taken note of it, and I promise that within a few weeks, you will see one or two follow-up episodes of the politics of cartography. So today's episode is on a new theme. We are going to talk about the changing equations in the Middle Eastern politics, in the Middle Eastern geopolitics, and its implications for India. On 13th of August 2020, there was a very surprise announcement. The United Arab Emirates and Israel announced a normalization of their relations with each other. The announcement was made in the United States by the President Donald Trump. This actually means that both the countries will establish formal diplomatic relations with each other, and Israel, which had threatened earlier to establish its full sovereignty over the West Bank area, has now suspended this planned annexation or the establishment of sovereignty in order to make the deal with the United Arab Emirates. So it's a win-win deal for both the UAE and the Israelis. The announcement of normalization of UAE and Israel relationship is a surprise indeed, because UAE happens to be only the third country in the Arab world to make peace with the United States. Way back in 1967, when Arab countries and Israel had fought what was known as the 6 Days War, and in the war when Israel occupied areas like the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, West Bank, Golan Heights, and many other areas, after that particular war, Arab countries which were united had pledged 3 no's as far as Israel was concerned. 3 no's indicated no to peace with Israel, no to talks with Israel, and no recognition of Israel. From there, the Arab countries indeed have come a long way. In 1978, about 4 decades ago, that is, as a result of the Camp David Accord, Egypt and Israel normalized relations with each other. As a result of this accord, Israel, which had taken the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt after the 6 Days War, returned that to Egypt. After the Oslo Accord, which was signed in 1988, the areas in Gaza and West Bank, Palestinians were allowed to establish what came to be known as the Palestinian Authority. And after this, Jordan began to normalize its relations with Israel. In 1994, then Jordan became the second Arab country to make peace with a country called Israel. And thus, in 2020, now UAE happens to be the third Arab country. But it may not be the last, because the Arab countries have come a long way since the days of Arab-Israeli wars, 3 of which were fought in 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So what has been responsible for Arab countries to be able to make peace talks with Israel in the recent times? A lot is changing in West Asian regional politics. We can see the rise of 2 regional powers. One of them is Turkey, the other is Iran. Turkey has been perceived as a threat by many Arab countries. One of the reasons is Turkey's rise under President Erdogan, and Erdogan has been propagating a certain brand of political Islam. He's been supporting Muslim Brotherhood, the organization through which Turkey's interference in a number of West Asian countries is seen to be increasing in recent times. The second one, that is Iran, also is propagating political Islam, but the Shiite brand of it. Most of the Arab kingdoms in West Asia are quite wary of, and they share a deep mistrust of political Islam, because many of them perceive political Islam as a threat to their dynastic monarchies in their own countries. Interference of Turkey and Iran in a number of conflicts, internal as well as interstate conflicts in West Asia, has been on the rise in the recent past, and it appears that outside powers, extra regional powers like Russia and China are supporting Turkey and Iran in these kind of equations. Like the Arab countries, even Israel shares a deep mistrust of political Islam, whether it is of the Muslim Brotherhood or it is of the Shiite Iran. And this is where the Arab kingdoms and Israel seem to have found a common cause, a cause to come closer to each other. Little nudge from the United States, and President Trump was instrumental in doing it, has helped United Arab Emirates make a deal with Israel in the last week. However, beyond the perceived threat of Turkey and Iran, there is also another reason, and that reason is attraction of the technology of Israel. By any count, Israel is perhaps the most technologically advanced country in the West Asian region. Its own record of innovation in various fields of technology, it's actually very impressive. And many of these Arab countries, even in the absence of formal political deals or formal recognition or formal diplomatic ties, have been making deals with Israeli companies for technology. Now, there is an attraction of Israel's technology in several fields, particularly in terms of biotechnology, technology in defense, because Israel is one of the leaders in defense technology. Also in terms of cyber technology, because cyber technology is again one of the important fields where Israel seems to be leading, and the Arab countries do have the attraction of Israel's cyber technology, including the technology of surveillance. And in addition to that, there is attraction also of the healthcare technology that Israel has. So by far, that also happens to be, the attraction of Israeli technology also happens to be one of the reasons why the Arab countries are getting closer to Israel. So we see different equations emerging in the West Asian politics altogether. On the one hand, we have Turkey and Iran being tacitly or overtly supported by Russia and China. On the other hand, we see Israel, but also the Arab states. And while so far only Egypt and Jordan and UAE have a very formal deal with Israel, countries like Saudi Arabia, without a formal deal and without formal recognition or diplomatic ties with Israel, are actually not in favor of Turkey and Iran as well. And thus, we see another group emerging in West Asian politics of Israel and some of the Arab countries who share a common mistrust of Turkey and Iran, a common mistrust of their brand of political Islam. What are the lessons then for India in these newly emerging relationships, in these newly emerging West Asian political equations? We can see that in last 6 years, particularly since Prime Minister Modi has taken over charge of the government, India has drawn closer to Saudi Arabia and also to the UAE. The various deals and various investment packages Saudi Arabia has offered to India is one of the examples, how India has got closer to the Saudi Arabians. As far as UAE is concerned, in addition to investment, there is also the recent development, the IPL, the latest edition of which it could not be held in India because of the coronavirus pandemic, and now it is being shifted to UAE. One testimony of the growing closeness and friendship of UAE and India. Just as India has got closer to Saudi Arabia and UAE and some other Arab countries, it has also drawn apart from Iran. And the latest development once again of the road or the railway link linking Chabahar to the Afghanistan border being taken away from India is also the testimony to that. It shows the growing rift between India and Iran over certain issues. On the other hand, India has firmed its friendship with Israel for years now, and it has very good diplomatic, political, economic as well as technological relations as far as Israel is concerned. It is important that India sustains its friendship with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, and with the other Arab countries. There are geopolitical reasons for it, but also there are geo-economic reasons for it. Saudi Arabia is one of the largest suppliers of oil for India. It is equally important for India to continue to have good relations with Iran, and there are equally good geopolitical and geo-economic reasons for the same. In the past few years, India has successfully walked the tightrope of balancing its relations with the Arab states and its relations with Israel. Now, in future, it seems India will have to walk another tightrope of balancing its relations with Arab countries and Israel on the one hand, Turkey and Iran on the other hand. It remains to be seen how this government and the subsequent Indian governments meet this challenge. Thank you for watching the episode, and please leave your comment in the comment box below.
If you like this video, please share it, and we would love to hear your comments in the comments section down here. Also, please do like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter to get minute-to-minute news updates. For more such shows and videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Now be the first to know about the latest updates on our new news app. Go on your Android or iOS, search for HW News Network. Download our app, choose the language you prefer to get updates in, and be up to date with the latest news.